A wise man once said, "There is no good in evil. There is only power in those too weak to seek it." This idea pops up everywhere in science and pop culture. Human beings, if given power, will abuse that power for their own personal gain, warping into an evil shell of their former selves. But is that really true? Roughly 50 years ago, the US Army was interested in learning more about power dynamics in prison. So they gave a Stanford professor named Philip Zimbardo a grant to study the psychology of power.
Does the situation outside of you, the institution, come to control your behavior? Or does the things inside of you, your attitudes, your values, your morality, allow you to rise above a negative environment?
The prison environment was chosen as a testing ground for Zimbardo's theory, which was personality isn't what makes you evil, but instead, people fill the social roles that they're in. You take an ordinary person and you put them in a role where they're required to be harsh, for example, a prison guard, and you will see them change to fit that role. Now, the experiment that Zimbardo carried out did get some answers. Kinda. But it's widely considered one of the most controversial experiments of all time. An experiment so out of control that it had to be stopped after only 6 days. Conditions got so bad that some of the participants had full mental breakdowns and had to seek psychiatric help after.
I don't know how to explain it. Stop inside! Out! Out now!
So, what happened? Zimbardo began by interviewing 70 applicants. Eventually, 24 men were hired and were each paid $15 a day to take part in the experiment. The participants were randomly assigned one of two roles. Researchers flipped a coin and assigned half the participants as guards and the other half as prisoners. The participants acting as prisoners were arrested by real cops at a random time and brought to a makeshift prison, built in the basement of Stanford University. Guards were given a uniform, a baton, and mirrored sunglasses that blocked eye contact. The idea was the lack of eye contact would give the guards a sense of anonymity, which would reduce the sense of empathy and human contact between the guards and the prisoners. The research team told the guards they had to maintain order, and they were allowed to do anything to achieve that, except hit the prisoners. When the inmates arrived, they were stripped in front of everyone and forced to wear a sack over their head, shackles on their ankles, and a prisoner uniform with a number assigned.
Of course, the guards started making fun of their genitals and humiliating them. And really, it's a start of what's known as the degradation process, which not only prisons, but lots of military-type outfits use that process.
On the first day, the guards immediately tried to establish dominance. And because they couldn't hit the prisoners, they screamed insults in their faces, smacked the baton next to their head, and forced them to do countless push-ups, jumping jacks, and sit-ups. On the first night, the guards used the whistle at 2:30 a.m. to wake up all the prisoners just to do a head count. Some of the prisoners, understandably tired, didn't take the count as seriously and were forced to do more push-ups as punishment. It didn't take long for the prisoners to realize the guards were going too far. So on day 2, they staged a revolt. They ripped the numbers off their clothes and used their bed frames to barricade themselves inside their cells. As soon as the guards noticed, they immediately called for backup. One of them used a fire extinguisher to force his way in, and things only escalated from there. Prisoner 8612 was seen as the ringleader of the rebellion and was placed in solitary confinement as a punishment.
Initially, I was stunned. I didn't expect a rebellion because not much happened. I mean, it wasn't clear what they were rebelling against, but they were rebelling against the status, rebelling against being anonymous, against having to follow orders from these other students.
So at this point, the guards are furious, and they come up with a plan to squash any semblance of disobedience. This manifested into more nighttime check-ins, and remember, the prison was dark, and the prisoners didn't know what time it was. So very early on in this experiment, the prisoners lost track of time and had no idea how long they had been there for. The humiliation routines were slowly standardized. The prisoners would line up against the wall, insulted, bullied, and screamed at, forced to exercise, and perform some gross tasks like clean up the toilets with their bare hands, strip naked, or perform for the guards' amusement. This all took a huge toll on the perceived ringleader 8612's mental health, so he asked to leave the experiment. And Zimbardo kinda didn't let him leave. This part of the reporting is a little controversial, so I'll let you make up your own minds. Take a look.
I said, well, I can see to it the guards don't hassle you personally. And in return, all I would like is some information from time to time about what the prisoners are doing. So essentially I'm saying I'd like you to be a snitch, an informer, And I said, think it over, and if you still want to leave, fine.
So prisoner 8612 understood this as he wasn't being allowed to leave. So he went back to the other prisoners and told them, hey, they're not letting us out. This is a real thing. We're actually prisoners.
He believed that we wouldn't let him go, although we've never said that. But the fact that he was the ringleader of the rebellion, and he told the other prisoners, they won't let you leave. And that really transformed the experiment into a prison.
I was told that I couldn't quit. And at that point, I just felt totally hopeless. More hopeless than I'd ever felt before.
So at this point, we're less than 36 hours into the experiment, and 8612's mental health is dropping fast.
Damn it! Tough! You don't know, I mean, God! I mean, Jesus Christ, I'm burning up inside, don't you know? I just can't take it.
He came up with a plan that if he acted crazy, we would have to release him.
I'm so up inside, I feel really up inside, you don't know, I gotta go. To a doctor, anything. I can't say that, I'm up, I don't know how to explain it, I'm up inside! Out! Now!
But Doug Corey, the man behind the number 8612, maintains later in life that he wasn't lying. He was genuinely having a mental breakdown.
I've never been so upset in my life, and it was an experience of being out of control.
After that incident, Zimbardo finally let him leave the experiment. But as soon as 8612 left, a replacement was brought in and he was subjected to the same treatment right away. Stripped, tied, blindfolded, and deloused. The guards made up this rule where no prisoner was allowed to use the washroom at night, so prisoners had to do their business in a bucket. The guards refused to empty because it was, quote, another punishment. The prisoners were interviewed a lot after this experiment, and they said that it felt like the research staff wasn't even watching at times, which led them to be so submissive to the point where some of them felt like they lost their sense of self.
While I'm interviewing the 819, he hears the prisoners shouting, 819 did a bad thing.
Prisoner 819 did a bad thing.
After hearing the chanting, prisoner 819 broke down sobbing. He was so hysterical that Zimbardo came to his senses a bit and reminded the student that he wasn't really a prisoner and told him to leave the experiment.
And he's crying, and he says, I can't leave. I said, what do you mean you can't leave? He said, no, I have to go back, because I don't want them to think that I'm a bad prisoner. I said, you're not a bad prisoner. You're not a prisoner. And this is not a prison. And it was this thing where he opened his eyes, and it was just really like a cloud being lifted.
But this still wasn't enough for Zimbardo to shut down the experiment as a whole. Near the end, prisoner 416 staged a hunger strike. As punishment, he was placed in solitary confinement while everyone banged on the door.
Thank you, 416.
Okay, 209.
I'll try that myself. Thank you, 416.
And to sow a general sense of distrust between the prisoners, the other inmates were also punished for his disobedience.
It was a prison to me. It still is a prison to me. I don't look on it as an experiment or a simulation. It was just a prison that was run by psychologists instead of run by the state.
On day 6, a PhD student came in to interview the prisoners, and she was so shocked by what she saw that she asked Zimbardo to end the experiment immediately.
I looked up and I just began to feel sick to my stomach. I had this just chilling, sickening feeling of watching this, and I just turned away, and I just let loose in this emotional tirade. I just lost it. I was angry, scared. I was in tears.
And I'm furious. I'm saying, you're supposed to, we had a big argument. You're supposed to be a psychologist. This is this interesting dynamic behavior in such a few days. But I'm going through this whole thing, the power of the situation. She says, no, it's that young boys are suffering, and you are responsible. You're letting it happen.
Now, this experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks, but finally, after 6 days, Zimbardo realized this was messed up and agreed to end the experiment. The results of this experiment shocked the world, and I can't understate how much of a cultural phenomenon it really was. Its conclusion was used as a defense in criminal trials, taught in classes around the world, and even submitted to Congress to explain the conditions in Abu Ghraib. It also inspired so many good conversations about the ethics of using human beings as subjects in an experiment.
Clearly, young men suffered verbally, physically. Prisoners felt shame in their role. Guards felt guilt. So in that sense, it's unethical. That is, nobody has the right, the power, the privilege to do that to other people.
Now, I don't know if you can tell by the footage, but one of the guards was sort of the leader of the bunch. His name is Dave Eshelman, and he was interviewed later for why he acted the way he did.
The way it was introduced to the guards, the whole concept of this experiment, we were never led to believe that we were part of the experiment. We were led to believe that our job was to get results from the prisoners, that they were the ones the researchers are really studying. If they want to show that prison is a bad experience, I'm going to make it bad.
My favorite clip from all this comes from an interview that happened shortly after the experiment. Here's prisoner 416 talking to Dave Eshelman.
How did it harm you? How does it harm you? Just to think about it, you mean that people can be like that?
Yeah. It let me in on some knowledge that I've never experienced firsthand. Because I know what you can turn into. I know what you're willing to do.
When I look back on it now, I behaved appallingly.
I didn't see where it was really harmful. It was degrading, and that was part of my particular little experiment to see how I could...
Your particular little experiment.
Yes,
why don't you tell me about that?
I was running little experiments of my own.
Tell me about your little experiment.
Okay.
I'm curious.
I wanted to see just what kind of verbal abuse that people can take before they start objecting, before they start flashing back.
Now again, keep in mind this study has been criticized a lot for both scientific and ethical reasons. Critics say that Zimbardo poisoned his data by participating in the experiment and coaching the guards to be mean.
The guards have to know that every guard is going to be what we call a tough guard. And so far, well, you have to kind of try and get it in you. Whether or not we can make this thing seem like a prison, which is the aim of the thing, depends largely on the guard's behavior.
Also, the ad for this experiment was for people who wanted to take part in a prison study. That's gonna attract a very specific type of person.
I really believed I was helping the researchers with some better understanding of human behavior. On the other hand, it was personally interesting to me. You know, I cannot say that I, did not enjoy what I was doing. Maybe, having so much power over these poor defenseless prisoners, maybe, you kind of get off on that a little bit.
To me, the way the study took shape, it seems like it needs a shift in its conclusion. It's not really about how people turn evil to fill societal roles, although I'm sure that happens to some degree. But this experiment doesn't prove that. Because the guards might have been coached, the conclusions that I personally draw from this are more related to the themes of authority and how people have trouble speaking out against authority. Just the existence of an authority figure had people pushing the boundaries of what is okay to do to these people. Check out my video on the Milgram experiment. It's a really good one. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps me out a ton. And as always, thanks for watching.
There is no good and evil. There is only power. And those too weak to seek it.